"You're not handling things appropriately. You old hag have to depart because we are going to live together. We'll cover living expenses with $1,700, grinned my sister Margot. My husband Raffle, who had been mute up until this point, asked, "Oh, is that okay then? I wish you luck in managing your $7,000 living expenditures." He laughed merrily. "What? $7,000? It was obvious that Margot was confused. It appears that she was perplexed as to why the sum had increased from $1,700 to $7,000. With a smile on his face, Raphael continued, "See this?" presenting to Margot and the others a comprehensive account that clarified the $7,000 outlay. Margot and the others became pale as they saw the details. However, we answered, "Well, we'll be leaving then," and we left them to their work in the house. I'm 37 years old and go by Penny. Raphael and I have been wed for 13 years. We recently purchased a new home near to our place of employment, where we currently reside. We both work. Up until now, my sister Margot and I were raised in a rented apartment owned by my parents. Though there are many memories associated with that flat, it is in danger of collapsing and will be demolished in 6 months. After my parents were forced to move out, Raphael made the comment, "It's going to be hard for your parents to find a new place now," while we were searching for a new location. If they believe it would be a good idea, they should move in with us. We have 1 extra room. Since my parents are already over 70, I've always worried about their ability to act swiftly in an emergency, so Raphael's suggestion that we live together was quite comforting. Being the second son, Raphael may have been especially excited about our parents moving in with us because they currently reside with his elder brother's family. At that moment, my heart was overflowing with appreciation for Raphael as my parents gladly accepted our desire to live together. My parents contacted us as they were getting ready to relocate to their new house. "We're thinking of having Margot and her friends help us move. Is that okay?" The story goes that when my parents discussed the move with Margot, she said, "Mark and I will help out." My parents were about to say no, but in the end, Margot talked them into it. When I heard this, I felt a range of emotions. Actually, this was Margot and her husband, Mark's first visit since I acquired my new property. They reside in an apartment a short 15-minute train journey away. I had first told Margot about the new house, but I hadn't given her all the specifics. The explanation was that since we first met 5 years ago, they had been having financial difficulties and had frequently turned to me for assistance. Margot phoned one day out of the blue and said, "I've decided to get married." Since our relationship was regular at the time, I asked with sincerity, "Congratulations. How does he seem?" "Mark is his name, and he's quite nice," Margot added, a little sheepishly but cheerfully. "He wants me to concentrate on the home because he is a carpenter." But after that, Margot's perspective started to progressively shift. She began requesting money. "I'm very sorry, big sister, but could you just lend me $500? We're low on living expenditures because Mark hasn't been able to work much due to the recent heavy rains. Please assist. I'll repay you with my next payday." She started inquiring virtually every month. I had been lending her money on a casual basis at first, but I have ceased doing so lately. The reason is because I've never received payment from Margot. Margot accuses me of being stingy after I turned down one of her recent demands for money. Isn't that all it is, $500? You should be able to afford that because you work for a large corporation. Take action to support your sister who is struggling. I'm worried Margot may come to my house and demand more money. My house is rather huge, so it's hardly odd that Margot would think we had more money to spend. Even though I was eager for my parents to move in, I was worried all the time. Then came the day my folks were supposed to move. As I waited for my parents, Margot, and her husband to arrive, I was anxious. Raphael wasn't home that day since he got called into work unexpectedly. I had to greet them on my own as a result. After a while, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Margot was standing there holding our mother's suitcase, saying, "Sis, the luggage is heavy. Hurry up and open the door." But wow, what a big house. It looks so grand, I'm envious. Mark, with a somewhat condescending tone, said, "Penny, don't just stand there. Let us in." He was carrying a small chest of drawers, clearly struggling with it. "Sure, please come in," I said, and in this way I welcomed Margot and her husband into my home. When Margot was shown the bedroom designated for our parents, she murmured in a low voice, "This is your parents' room. It's bigger than my apartment. Is it really okay, such a big room?" Ungrateful, but Mom asked modestly. Dad seemed a bit confused as he gazed around. We weren't really using this room. I assured my parents that they weren't imposing anything on us. In fact, this room was originally intended as a child's room. However, my husband and I have been busy and haven't been proactive about having children for 13 years. That's why we decided to offer this unused room to my parents. "Ha, you could have lent it to me. You're still stingy, sis," Margot commented while organizing our parents' luggage. Eventually, the moving process for my parents was completed in about 2 hours. This was because they had disposed of most of their belongings. All the appliances were picked up by recycling companies, and the proceeds were given to Margot and her husband as a token of gratitude for their help. Clothes and other small items were also given away to neighbors or disposed of. Thus, the room my parents moved into was spacious enough to accommodate all their belongings. "Margot, Mark, thank you." My mother expressed her gratitude. As Margot nodded to my mother's words, she turned to speak to me. "Would it be okay if I come to visit occasionally? Since our family home is gone, I want to see Mom and Dad," Margot said. Indeed, the apartment where my parents previously lived has been terminated. Given Margot's desire to see our mother, there's no particular reason to deny her visits, so I replied, "Of course, that's fine. However, I'm quite busy with work, so I won't have much time available." "No problem, thank you." Margot expressed her gratitude. After that, Margot started visiting about once a week. Curiously, Mark often came along as well. Although Mark is supposed to be at work, he sometimes visits on weekdays, and my mother happily reports. Today, Mark has come along too. Since Margot and Mark's visits increased, troubling issues have arisen at home. Things are missing again. Every time I open the refrigerator or cabinets, I notice that food and household items are dwindling. Initially, it was just vegetables and toilet paper disappearing. Gradually, however, recently expensive items, like the premium ham my husband received from his boss as a mid-year gift and cosmetics I bought at the department store, are missing. At first, I thought perhaps my mother was using them, but she said she wasn't involved. "I haven't touched anything," she stated plainly. "Really? It's becoming troublesome, especially since recently it's only the expensive items that are disappearing," I complained. My father responded, "Okay, I understand. I'll also keep an eye out, please. Let's not cause any more trouble," I quietly told my parents. However, after that, Margot didn't respond to my emails, and our household items continued to disappear, increasing my frustration. 3 months passed, and my patience reached its limit. The disappearance of Raffles' personal belongings and mine continued. Recently, a high-end brand wallet I gave to Raphael for his birthday went missing. Margot or Mark is most likely the culprit. This is clearly theft. Margot has recently been coming to our house frequently on weekdays when we are not around, and even if I replenish the food, it disappears by the next day. As a result, maintaining our food stock became a challenge. To address this, Raphael and I decided to take a day off work and have a serious talk with Margot to stop her from coming to our house any further. On the day of action, we pretended to go to work as usual, but hid nearby our house, waiting for Margot and Mark to arrive. About an hour later, Margot and Mark appeared. "Isn't Mark supposed to be working?" Raphael muttered to me, but I couldn't answer as I didn't know the details. Just 5 minutes after Margot and Mark entered the house, we returned home. "I'm back," I said as we entered, and Margot appeared looking startled. "Why are you here, big sis? It's a weekday, isn't it? Aren't you supposed to be at work? And Raphael is here too." Margot was clearly flustered. "I took the day off because we need to talk to you, Margot," I explained confidently. Mark and my parents rushed to the entrance looking surprised. I glanced at Mark and said calmly, "Since you're here too, Mark, it's good timing. We came here to tell both of you not to come to our house ever again." Upon hearing this, Margot suddenly became furious and retorted, "What are you talking about? I come here during the day to keep Mom and Dad company while you're away. If you need to talk to Mom and Dad, you can do so at a nearby cafe. It's within walking distance for them." I suggested calmly, "It costs money to talk at a cafe. I don't have that kind of extra money." Margot snapped back irritably. With a deep sigh, I responded, "So that's why things are disappearing from our house. You've been stealing them, haven't you? I really feel like calling the police." Raphael nodded in agreement and added, "I can't find the birthday wallet that Penny gave me. I was planning to switch it out on my next day off. Can we get it back soon?" Mark was clearly panicking and exclaimed, "We're family, aren't we? Why are you doubting us?" "There's no doubt that Mark stole Raphael's wallet," I declared firmly yet calmly to them. "Leave this house right now. If you never set foot here again, we forget this incident ever happened. But from now on, we're cutting ties with you, Margot. Goodbye. I no longer want to be involved with those who steal." Although it's painful to admit that we don't have evidence of past thefts, there's nothing else to be done but to let it go. Nevertheless, Margot and her husband were not ready to accept this. "So I won't be able to see Mom anymore, you villains," Margot shouted at me angrily. I then offered an alternative. "How about you live with Mom and Dad? Then you can be their companion every day. But remember, you'll need at least $1,700 a month for living expenses." I doubted Margot and Mark could afford that amount. However, as the argument escalated, Margot became defiant. "You're not taking care of things properly. We're going to live together now, so you old hag need to leave. We'll pay $1,700 for living expenses." Margot said that with a grin. Raphael, who had been silent until then, finally spoke up. "Oh, is that so? Then good luck managing the $7,000 in living expenses." He laughed brightly. "What? $77,000? Margot was visibly confused. She didn't understand why the amount had jumped from $1,700 to $7,000. Smiling, Raphael said, "Look at this," and showed them a detailed statement that explained the $7,000 expenses. Seeing the details, Margot and Mark paled, but we left them to it and said, "Well, we'll be leaving then." We then left the house and headed to a nearby hotel. As soon as we entered the room, we both collapsed from exhaustion. The tension of the situation had drained us both too much. "I'm really tired today. Sorry for putting you through this, Raphael," I said. Even though it was still before noon, I felt extremely tired. It seems like common sense doesn't apply to Margot or my mother, and their excessive behavior still left me feeling unsettled. Raphael said, "You must be even more tired, Penny. Margot is unreasonable, but your mother-in-law is quite unusual, too." It seemed like Mom was turning a blind eye to Margot and Mark's thievery, and she stayed silent during the recent argument. Perhaps Mom believes that she and Margot have done nothing wrong. Maybe she doesn't even recognize the theft as such because it's a family matter. Mom has always favored Margot, which is why she always prioritizes her requests. I was always focused on my studies and didn't bond much with Mom. I studied hard with the goal of getting into a top university. Thanks to my efforts, I was accepted into my first choice and later secured a job at a major company. On the other hand, Margot neglected her studies and was more interested in chatting and playing with Mom. As a result, she only managed to get into a mediocre university and struggled with job hunting. Margot was only hired as a contract employee, not a full-time one. However, it seems that for Mom, the less clever the child, the dearer they are. Mom always favored Margot, even making a distinction between our birthday presents. What should we do now? It's almost like we've been robbed of our home, Raphael asked timidly. It seems he feels unable to take any drastic action because Margot and Mom are his family. But for me, forgiving Margot and Mom is out of the question. Of course we will fight this thoroughly, I answered resolutely. I explained the situation to Raphael calmly. Raphael nodded silently. Having been insulted to this extent, I resolved not to remain silent. I decided to sever my relationship with Mom just like I did with Margot. Later in the afternoon, we headed to a local law office. A few days later, we returned home with a lawyer. When we rang the doorbell, Margot answered. "Hi, what big sis? What do you want now?" "I have something to discuss about the house. Please gather everyone in the living room," I asked Margot. "Why do I have to do that? It's such a hassle," Margot said, sounding annoyed. "Hurry up. We won't leave unless you do. We have a lawyer with us," I said sternly. "Okay, fine," Margot responded, clearly rattled by the presence of the lawyer, and hurried off to call Mark and our parents. Eventually, everyone gathered in the living room, which was messy and littered with candy wrappers everywhere. We had cleaned the house thoroughly before we left, but it was clear that no one had touched it since. "So what's this about? I don't really have anything to say," Margot started reluctantly. "Did you come to take back the house? We're living here now, so it's impossible." Mark said that to me with a smile. Mom also spoke to me. "Penny, you and Raphael have moved out, right? I prefer to continue living here with Margot and Mark. They keep me company and it's fun being with them." "Being with you always made me feel like I had to be on my best behavior, which was exhausting," she said with a wry smile. Knowing that Mom saw me that way hurt a little. What was all the time we spent together for? Feeling empty from her remarks, I decided to cut off my feelings for Mom. "Raphael and I don't mind leaving this place at all," I replied. "Yeah, maybe we didn't need this big house after all," Raphael continued. If that's the case, Margot suddenly brightened up. Mark and my parents also looked visibly pleased. Seeing their reactions, I delivered the final word. "However, there's a condition. You guys will have to buy the house," I said. Margot's face fell. "What? You mean the mortgage details we paid before you left? $5,300 a month? Are you joking?" Margot objected to the amount. But the price was fair. The house is located near the center of town, just a 5-minute walk from the station, and features a spacious 4-bedroom layout. Thus, Raphael and I understood its value and had taken out a mortgage, making monthly payments. The reason for the $5,300 monthly payment was to reduce the total payment amount by paying off the mortgage sooner. The decision to opt for a shorter mortgage term to reduce interest had increased the monthly burden. "It doesn't matter if you all don't agree. Raphael and I co-own this house, so if you want to continue living here, you'll need to buy it from us. Now please proceed, counselor," I said, handing over to our lawyer. The lawyer nodded confidently and told Margot and her family, "Here is the sales contract. Please check the amount, and we will need your signatures." Their expressions changed as they looked at the documents. "Why is the selling price $1,500,000? This is a rip-off," Margot exclaimed, trembling. However, this amount was calculated based on the remaining mortgage and was quite reasonable considering the market value of the area. As the lawyer explained the details, Margot and Mark's faces grew increasingly pale. "This is impossible. We can't afford this," Margot said, shaking. My parents were also astonished. They probably hadn't realized the house was worth so much. "If you can't pay, then why have you been squatting here forever? I thought you wanted to stay and were planning to buy it. "Now please sign, Margot. You can take out a mortgage to cover it, right?" I pressed. Trembling, Margot apologized. "I'm sorry. I was just envious knowing you lived in such a nice house. I didn't think it through." Mark also muttered slowly, "I'm sorry, but even if I work every day of the year, I wouldn't be able to earn that kind of money." Mom suggested to Dad, "We can't afford this high amount. Maybe it would be better if Penny and Raphael lived with us. We can eat delicious meals together." Dad looked distressed. I stated firmly, "Raphael and I have no intention of living with you after being betrayed once. We plan to live our lives on our own. From now on, we are also cutting ties with you, so please understand." I declared this to my parents. From now on, I would have no dealings with Margot or my parents. At that moment, Mom exclaimed in shock, "What do you mean, cutting ties? Then who will give us our allowance?" Dad also looked pale. "What do you mean by allowance?" Margot asked, standing up and confronting her mother. In fact, in addition to the $1,700 for living expenses, we used to give Mom and Dad an allowance of about $2,000 a month. "It has decreased a bit since we started living together," I replied. Margot was shocked, exclaiming, "Then $7,000 isn't nearly enough. How can you afford to give out so much money?" Mark was also stunned. "That's because Raphael and I work at a major corporation and have decent incomes. It would be impossible alone, but together we manage," I explained. Shocked by the disparity in income, Margot collapsed to the floor. "But from now on, I won't have any dealings with you or Mom. It's your turn to take care of our parents," I said calmly with a smile. Margot's and our parents' faces went pale with shock. Since then, the discussion of selling the house to Margot disappeared. I had anticipated that Margot and our parents wouldn't have the funds. Instead, Margot, Mark, and my parents were forced to leave our house. With the lawyer involved, they moved out more smoothly than expected. Margot and the others complained that living in such a big house was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, but that was irrelevant to me. "Isn't your apartment lease still active? I'll send all of Mom and Dad's belongings there," I told her. Afterward, I arranged for movers to transport our parents' belongings to Margot's apartment. The apartment was quite small, and it was unclear if all the belongings would fit, but that was no longer my concern. I instructed the movers to have Margot pay all the moving expenses, considering this as compensation for the inconvenience Raphael and I faced. It was quite inexpensive. Even after they moved out, Margot occasionally contacted us. "Big sis, I'm really sorry. Can you take our parents back? They're wasting so much money and we can't cover the living expenses. Plus, their pensions are used for entertainment. Mark is very upset too. Can you do something?" she pleaded desperately. Currently, it seems our parents are living in Margot's apartment. All living together in such a cramped space must be incredibly difficult for the four of them. The fact that our parents were frivolous spenders had become clear after they started living with us, often squandering their pensions on their favorite indulgences. My mother loved luxury brands, and my father was obsessed with alcohol and gambling. Given this, their wasteful spending was somewhat predictable. "You were the one who decided to live with them, right? I'm not involved anymore. We've cut ties thanks to you. Taking care of them has given us more financial leeway since we stopped giving them allowances," I told Margot. Margot responded, "That's awful. I'm struggling financially so much. Mark has brought up divorce. I need to find a job." Hearing her cry over the phone and knowing how desperate she was made me feel a strange sense of satisfaction. "Then find a job. I don't want to be involved anymore. Goodbye," I said and hung up the phone. Since then, my mother has also contacted me several times asking to live with us again, but I have no intention of complying. "Penny, please forgive me. It's hard living in Margot's cramped apartment. The cheap meals aren't satisfying, and I really miss your cooking. Can I pack up and come back home soon?" I remained firm in my stance. "Mother, you chose to live with Margot. That's none of my concern now. I won't help you any more. You are practically strangers to me. I'm busy preparing seafood palo right now. I'll be hanging up soon. By the way, seafood palo was your favorite, wasn't it? I'll enjoy it, including your portion." With those words, I ended the call. My mother must surely be regretting her choices now. 3 years have passed, and Raphael and I continue to live our lives unchanged. There have been times when Margot or my mother visited, and I had to call the police, but lately it has been peaceful. Ultimately, both Margot and my mother chose divorce. Mark and my father distanced themselves from them, understanding that this would allow them a more peaceful life. Margot, who has been dedicated to her family and lacks income or job experience, finds job hunting extremely difficult. My mother, who has been a homemaker for many years, only receives a small pension. It's clear that having such financially burdened people around makes it impossible to sustain a stable life. Thus, Mark and my father chose divorce and distanced themselves from Margot and my mother to achieve a better quality of life. While Mark and my father have managed to escape the immediate problems, they haven't completely evaded the consequences of their decisions. After splitting from Margot, Mark tried to return to his sporadic carpentry work, but it hasn't been going well. He faces cold treatment from other craftsmen and is harshly utilized, which doesn't bode well for him. With no experience outside of carpentry, transitioning to another field presents a challenging path. It seems he will have to continue facing these difficulties as he works. My father has been circling around relatives' homes since getting divorced from my mother, feeling more and more uneasy. Finding and affording a rental house is a difficult effort for someone who is 73 years old, and it appears he will continue to live in restricted conditions. When Margot and my mother made their separations public, it was obvious why there had been divorces in our family. My mother's overspending caused her marriage to deteriorate, and Margot's infidelity precipitated her divorce. When Margot and my mother returned pleading for permission to reoccupy the house, it was clear how desperate they were financially. Because the two of us barely make any money, we are in danger of losing our flat due to unpaid rent. Permit us to remain with you, please. My mother also yelled passionately, "Help us," as Margot started her appeal. If I'm alone, that's okay with me. At least give me some seafood, please. Just trying to assist Mom wouldn't be fair. I had to contact the cops right then and there. My mother and Margot got into a heated argument in front of our house. Most certainly they will always be the same people. It was a relief when Margot and my mother's visits ended, with the police getting involved. My life has changed significantly and joyfully since then. By some miracle, I got pregnant. Now that I have a somewhat huge tummy and finding it more and more difficult to move, I have taken maternity leave and want to transform it into parental leave till our child turns 1. Much though we were concerned about potential outcomes, we now need to put in much more effort for our child. Raphael declared his fresh dedication. Yes, from now on, it's about the 3 of us pulling together. I laughed along with Raphael and agreed. I may not have Margot or my parents in my life, but I do have Raphael and our unborn kid. We want to value our immediate family going forward, not just the ones who are related to us by blood. From the bottom of my heart, I genuinely think that.